Hello everyone and welcome back to another reaction video. Today we are taking a look at HistoryMarche's Basil II series. This is part 2. Last time we covered the time during which Basil II was in his minority and unable to rule, and we mainly focus on the rules of Nikephoros II and John I Tzimiskes. And now we will continue on his journey after the defeat of the Battle of the Trajan Gates, and we'll see where this goes.
In 985, Emperor Basil II deposed his uncle and former advisor, Basil Lakapenos. Having been the power behind the throne for over a decade, while his two nephews ruled in name only, the old eunuch had no intentions of retiring soon.
Yeah, so a reminder here that Basil Lakapenos is the illegitimate son of Emperor Romanos I Lakapenos, and that is several emperors back at this point. But yeah, Lakapenos has been the true power behind the throne for 10 years now, while Basil II has been gaining experience and gradually gaining enough power in order to depose his eunuch advisor. And now Basil rules himself, but that doesn't mean people are gonna take this lying down, and certainly not someone as scheming as Basil Lakapenos.
But Lakapenos had sensed early on that young Basil II aspired to govern himself. Alarmed by the ambition of the legitimate emperor as much as Lakapenos, the aristocracy of Asia Minor began conspiring with the eunuch. The so-called Anatolian dynasty, or the powerful ones, rallied behind a general who had helped the two Basils crush a revolt in the late 970s.
Yeah, so to give a quick background and reminder, because this was sort of covered in the last part, but what had happened was that upon the ascension of John Tzimiskes to the throne, Bardas Phocas rebelled because it was, I believe, his uncle, Nikephoros II, who was assassinated by Tzimiskes and the Empress Theophano. And so Phocas raises the banner of rebellion. Bardas Skleros is sent to defeat Phocas, and he manages to do so. Phocas is then sent into exile for about 8 years, I believe, on the island of Chios in the Aegean. And when Basil II came to power, Skleros revolted, and then Bardas Phocas was recalled from exile to defeat Skleros, who was then exiled to Baghdad. And for his services, Bardas Phocas was rewarded with the title of Domesticos of the East, Domesticos of the schools, whichever you want to use. But basically he was in command of all Roman forces in the East, which is quite a substantial force, of course. And now Basil Lakapenos is conspiring with Phocas to grab power from the legitimate emperor. Remember, Basil II and Constantine VIII are the two legitimate sons of Constantine VII. So yeah, here we go again with these Roman rebellions, unfortunately.
Now bearing the title of Domesticos of the schools, the illustrious commander Bardas Phocas held command over all of Asia Minor and posed a severe challenge to the rule of the young Macedonian emperor. However, before long, young Basil uncovered his uncle's attempts to create an anti-imperial coalition. The old Lakapenos was condemned and exiled, and for once Basil II held a firm grip over the empire's affairs. Yet soon, the tide would turn against the young emperor, and the Byzantine world would be engulfed in a vicious civil strife. Having hoped that his first Bulgarian expedition would bolster his reputation, Basil's military inexperience achieved the exact opposite. The emperor's position couldn't have been more precarious after the debacle at the Trajan Gates in August 986. Worse, after the deposition of his uncle, the emperor was bold enough to demote several influential officials. Most importantly, Bardas Phocas, who now, at least on paper, commanded only the city of Antioch and its surroundings.
Yeah, on paper only though.
However, the entirety of Asia Minor was loyal to their former commander. Joining Phocas's anti-loyalist camp were Leo Melicinos, whose hasty retreat had caused a disaster at Trajan's Gate, and the former governor of Italy, a man named Delphinus. Around the same time, Bardas Skleros, the former rival of Bardas Phocas, arrived in Meliten from Baghdad.
Yeah, so things are going south very quickly now after the failed campaign against the Bulgarians. And now our dear friend Bardas Skleros has returned from Baghdad with another bid for power, and he had actually secured the support of the Buyid Sultan. In this effort, he was offered a treaty of alliance, and this was granted in exchange for some ports in southern Armenia. So Skleros has sold out parts of the empire in order to make this bid for power. And now his rebellion is quickly growing in strength. And he will conspire with his old rival Bardas Phocas to grab power.
This time, however, the old general was here on the invite of Phocas. The two men had negotiated a truce, and Skleros soon headed towards Cappadocia, where his small force of Arab tribesmen and Armenians could link with Phocas's large army.
And what had Phocas offered Skleros in return? Well, he had offered Skleros unprecedented powers over Roman Syria and Mesopotamia. And this was the deal. He would get control over Syria and Mesopotamia in exchange for lending his support to this rebellion.
Upon arriving in Caesarea, however, old Skleros was captured and imprisoned. Having eliminated a potential threat to his power, Bardas Phocas proclaimed himself emperor in August 987.
Not for the first time, mind you. He did this after John Zimisces came to power.
And headed towards the Marmara Sea. The commander divided his armies into two. He planned to blockade the Dardanelles with his part of the army.
Oh yeah, just on the Skleros getting imprisoned, that was kind of a funny move from Phocas. He imprisoned him, then was able to absorb all of his forces and all of his supporters without any trouble, and now he doesn't have to keep his promise of, granting power over Syria and Mesopotamia. And this left Basil in quite dire straits. He now only controlled the very limited European provinces of the Eastern Roman Empire. He had basically an empty treasury and a very weak army, because all of Anatolia was now in the hands of Phocas. And Anatolia was, of course, the heartland of the Eastern Roman Empire, with the most revenue and the most soldiers located there. So Basil is going to have to think outside the box for this one.
While the second half, commanded by Delphinus, was to head towards the Asian shore of the Dardanelles. But the ponderous march of the two anti-loyalist forces, combined with their inability to achieve naval supremacy, gave Basil enough time to plan a course of action carefully. Having 2/3 of his empire turned against him, the young emperor had no other choice but to seek foreign aid. As Delphinus and his men encamped near Chrysopolis, Basil entered negotiations with the son of the great Svetoslav, a certain Prince Vladimir.
Yeah, this is, of course, if you are familiar with Russian or, you know, the history of the Eastern Europe, you would know that this is Vladimir the Great. This is the man who will convert the Rus into Orthodox Christianity, and this is a really pivotal moment in history that will define this region for millennia to come.
Who just so happened to be interested in converting his people, the Rus, to Orthodox Christianity. Vladimir agreed to help Basil in return for his sister's hand in marriage.
Yeah, so Basil looked for foreign support, and he looked around and found that the Rus were about the only ones strong enough and willing enough to make a difference in this conflict against the Phocas. And he saw no other choice but to marry off his sister Anna to Vladimir. And this was an unprecedented move. No pagan had ever been allowed to marry a Byzantine princess, let alone Christian princes hadn't been allowed to marry a Byzantine princess. Very few of them, at least. But anyways, Vladimir agrees, and he also agrees to convert to Christianity, and he's going to send 6,000 elite men to assist Basil, and this will turn out to be quite decisive.
The very same one that had been promised to the Bulgarian nobleman Aron. Securing a wedding with a princess from the Macedonian dynasty was a feat that even the Holy Roman emperors couldn't achieve.
Which shows how desperate the situation is, right? Even Christian rulers who have begged the Romans for a princess, they rarely ever got their wishes, so yeah.
Secured him military aid from Vladimir in the form of 6,000 battle-hardened Slavs and Scandinavians who headed for the Golden Horn to join Basil's army. Although marrying off his sister to a foreign heathen may have been a blow to the family's prestige, the emperor knew that the balance of the civil war and his place on the throne hung on this union. By December 988, an army of 6,000 battle-hardened Slavs and Scandinavians anchored in the Golden Horn. In the meantime, Phocas, who had unsuccessfully tried to secure Abydos, headed towards Chrysopolis, leaving Leo Melicinos behind in charge of the siege. However, before the general could reach far, Basil, now reinforced by his new elite Scandinavian guard.
Yeah, this is the Varangian Guard, and if you know anything about the Varangians, you know that this is probably the most effective, most loyal bodyguard unit a Roman emperor has ever had. We had many of them by this point. We had the Praetorians, which is, the Praetorians are the scum of the earth because they killed so many emperors. I don't even know how many at this point. And then we had the Excubitors, the Scula Palatinae. We had many bodyguard units, but the Varangians will prove to be the most battle-hardened, the most fearsome, the most loyal. And this, alongside the rest of the troops sent by Vladimir, will mark a turning point here in this conflict.
Crossed the Dardanelles and headed towards the enemy camp. On an early January morning, a squadron of Basil's men sprayed the shore near Delphinus's base with Greek fire, denying the anti-loyalists a way out. Basil's main army quickly routed their challengers in a short and decisive clash. Delphinus was impaled alive in what would become the first of Basil's many gruesome punishments. In the meantime, a small loyalist army led by the Armenian Gregory Taranites ravaged the rebel-controlled territories. But upon reaching the Euphrates River, the Armenians were defeated by Phocas's son, who commanded an army of fresh recruits, generously delivered by the Georgian kingdom of Tau.
Yeah, so David of Tau is going to provide some significant forces to Phocas's rebellion, and of course he didn't do it for free. He was granted control of Theodosiopolis, that is the name of the city, for his lifetime, so there was a price to be paid here, but they may come to regret this move.
Unfortunately for Nikephoros Phocas, when rumors of the defeat at Chrysopolis spread throughout Anatolia, his men deserted en masse, returning to their Georgian homeland. In the meantime, the self-proclaimed emperor, Phocas, had returned to his camp near Abydos, intensifying the city's siege. By April, Basil and his army had already landed nearby, and Bardas had no choice but to face the young emperor in battle. However, at the very beginning of the ensuing clash, Phocas suffered a seizure, immediately dying.
Yeah, this is what I call dumb luck. It is very likely, I think, that Basil would have been able to defeat Phocas, especially with his battle-hardened Slavs and Scandinavians. But it was far from a sure thing. And this really spared him a lot of trouble. He didn't have to fight a large battle, and he, saved on his troops for other engagements. And this, of course, left Basil II, the undisputed victor of the civil war, because the leader of the civil insurrection here, civil war, died. So, but Basil II was not merciful at all. He executed many of the rebels, and he continued to suppress the remaining embers of resistance brutally.
News of their commander's demise spread mass panic among the Anatolian army. Phocas's soldiers immediately broke their formation. Hotly pursued by imperial squadrons and routed bit by bit, much of the rebel force was crushed then and there on the 13th of April, in front of Abydos. With that victory, Basil had secured his position on the throne. In an unusual display of mercy, much of the rebel command, including Leo Melisinos, lived to see another day. Basil's dealings in Anatolia weren't over, however. In Cappadocia, Skleros was released from captivity and put in charge of the rebellion. Old and...
Yeah, so Phocas's widow by now released Skleros from captivity so that the struggle against Basil could be renewed, but it was a hopeless task. And Skleros is just going to take the easy way out and accept the pardon and, walk off into the sunset.
Half blind, the senior general secured a truce with Basil, ending the revolt and retiring in Thrace. The final holdout of the rebellion, the city of Antioch, surrendered soon after. With the rebellion crushed, Basil led a campaign against the king of Tau, David III, who had supported Phocas's revolt. Furthermore, the old monarch had used the chaos of the civil war to put his nephew Bagrat on the throne of the neighboring kingdom of Abkhazia. David had named his relative an heir to his kingdom, meaning that the two Georgian kingdoms of Tau and Abkhazia were to merge upon his death. This troubled Basil II, who forced King David to accept his peace terms after a brief and poorly recorded campaign. The old monarch was to keep his crown on one significant condition. Basil was to be adopted by David and named heir to his kingdom. And thus, almost effortlessly, Basil had secured the incorporation of an entirely new province, the size of Cilicia.
Yeah, so in spring 990, he launches this expedition against the Iberians, not to be confused with the Iberian Peninsula. And it turned out to be a decisive victory. We don't know much details, as they said, but it was a victory nonetheless. And David was forced to basically bequeath all of his possessions to Basil. And upon David's death, Basil would incorporate these regions into the Eastern Roman Empire. Basil did actually give David a court rank, a senior court rank, and David would go on to expand his territory at the expense of Muslim lands, and so effectively that increased the Eastern Roman domains even further. So this is such a genius move by Basil, and it shows you that you do not always need to conquer through force. And he took a page out of the Habsburg book almost, although this wasn't a marriage, but it's an adoption, but it's similar in tactic. So quite effortlessly he incorporates a very large region, an entirely new region, by the way, into the Eastern Roman Empire. So it shows you that Basil is more than just a cunning strategist and on the battlefield. He is also a skilled diplomat. And his reign is off to a pretty good start despite the disaster at the Battle of the Trajan Gates.
By late 989, the emperor had already returned to Constantinople. Now he could finally focus on what would become his life's work.
Yes, but the 3 years of the civil war left the empire quite weakened, actually. The army was in disarray, and the treasury was still nearly empty. And there were many external threats, including the Bulgarians, to deal with. And of course, Bulgarians wasn't idle during all of this. They took the opportunity to expand their territory. And the Arab raids in Italy continued, and so on and so forth. So Basil is not in a great state here. And the conflict had left quite a profound impact on Basil II. All of these betrayals and constant threats made him into quite an austere and borderline, I wouldn't call him paranoid, but a very suspicious ruler. He was very distrustful of powerful figures and generals after this, especially those of Iberian and Armenian descent. And so Basil avoided marriage on purpose, and because he was afraid that his wife's family would politically interfere with his rule. So yeah.
Restoring the old Balkan provinces of the empire and defeating Samuel of Bulgaria once and for all. Slowed down by a year due to an earthquake in Constantinople, Basil finally departed for Bulgaria in 991. The emperor's strategy was to spend as much time as possible in Bulgaria's heartland, Macedonia. Reinforced by his small Varangian army and a massive regular army, the emperor invaded Bulgaria. Instead of inflicting a single crippling defeat on Samuel, the Romans relied on a more time-consuming but less risky course of action.
Yeah, so after the defeat at the Trajan Gates, Basil has decided to switch up his strategy, and he's going to start a systematic campaign of devastation against the Bulgarians. He's going to avoid any large field battles that could result in costly defeats, and he's going to make sure he avoids any ambushes like in the previous campaign. And he's going to gradually reduce the fortified positions of the Bulgarians. And this is a safe strategy. It is a time-consuming strategy, but Basil now has the resources to make such a campaign, and so we will see him extend his rule over the Macedonian provinces. And I mean, he is a emperor of the Macedonian dynasty, so it stands to reason he should have control over the Macedonian provinces.
Gradually reducing Bulgarian strongholds in Macedonia over the course of many months. On the other hand, Samuel decided to leave only a tiny defensive force in Bulgaria, knowing that the rugged terrain of Macedonia would do much of the defense for him, and decided on an offensive strategy. He besieged and captured Byzantine strongholds around Thessaloniki, Dyrrhachium, and Thessaly. However, Basil's initiative in Macedonia was marked by great success. By 992, much of Western Macedonia was in Byzantine hands.
You know, now that I think about it, this strategy very much is similar to how Fabius Maximus handled Hannibal in Italy during the Second Punic War, but sort of in reverse. This is not a defensive strategy, but an offensive strategy. But it bears many of the similarities. It's a very cautious strategy where you gradually win over a long time.
The major stronghold of Varia was reconquered, and Bulgaria's eunuch, Tsar Roman, was captured during a minor confrontation. As you may remember from our previous episode, Roman was the brother of Boris II, who had been arrested and dethroned by Emperor John Zimisces in 971. The two brothers had escaped from Byzantine captivity. However, only the castrated Roman had made it to Sredets, where he was proclaimed Emperor of Bulgaria. Roman's title was mostly symbolic, as many of the roles of a monarch were filled by Samuel. Sources are dubious about Roman's fate after his capture in 991. Some claim that the Bulgarian Tsar died in captivity, while others state that the Tsar was handed out a governorship in Anatolia, the latter being more likely. After the successes of 991, Basil continuously wintered in Bulgaria for the next 3 years, gradually capturing fortress after fortress. In the meantime, Samuel's offensive efforts also proved fruitful, with the Bulgarians seizing multiple border strongholds, including the major city of Dyrrhachium. In the end, luck turned out to be on Samuel's side, when disturbing news from the east forced Basil to return and winter in Constantinople in late 994. While Basil was gradually reducing Bulgarian control over Macedonia, a war over the Byzantine vassal emirate of Aleppo was in full motion. This conflict had ended poorly for Basil's Duke of Antioch, an old general named Michael Baucis.
Yeah, so Michael Baucis, I mentioned him in the first part. He is one of the main conspirators behind the assassination of Nicephorus II. Remember, he had been demoted after he disregarded the emperor's instruction not to take Antioch in his absence, which he did anyways. But now he's back, and Baucis has been very appropriately appointed the Duke of Antioch. But he's going to have a very hard time facing off the very powerful Fatimid Caliphate. And yeah, he's going to need help from Basil and his main army, because the Fatimids are bringing quite a bit of resources to bear, and this is one of the most important governorships in the empire, but it doesn't come necessarily with a lot of men and resources, so yeah.
In the years prior, the emperor had refused to appoint another Domestikos of the East, fearing another rebellion. Instead, Basil delegated the duties of protecting the Asian frontier to the Duke of Antioch. This made for a sluggish Byzantine reaction to significant eastern threats.
I mean, you can understand Basil at this point, right? He was the one who appointed Phocas to be Domesticus of the East, and what did he get for that? For his trouble? Yeah, he got another rebellion, so it is understandable that Basil doesn't want to appoint another Domesticus of the East at this moment, but he is going to need it sooner or later. But for now, it will have to do that the Duke of Antioch is the one who is defending the easternmost provinces of the empire. But as they said, it makes for quite sluggish responses. If there had been a Domesticus of the East, he could have mobilized some resources of the Anatolian provinces and then move down into Syria and repel the Fatimids, but that is not the case.
As Baucis had to turn directly to Constantinople for assistance. The Fatimid Caliph Al-Aziz exploited this situation, vigorously attempting to transform the Emirate of Aleppo into yet another province in his transcontinental empire. To accomplish this task, the Caliph appointed Manu Takin, one of his most talented generals, as governor of Damascus. Starting in 992, the Turkic general would frequently invade the Arab Emirate of Aleppo, defeating General Baucis in 2 encounters and capturing the major fortress of Apamea. Yet, Aleppo's residents vigorously resisted Takin's attempts to siege their capital city.
Yeah, so the Aleppans are managing to hold their own for the moment, and that is a good thing, because this Emirate of Aleppo is a very important vassal for the Romans to cement their control over Syria.
After spending the winter of 993 and 994 in Damascus, the Fatimid general assembled a large force, planning on capturing Aleppo and repelling the city's Christian allies once and for all. Reinforced by a party led by Leo Melicinos, the Duke of Antioch's enlarged army of close to 10,000 was still no match for Manu Takin's force, which in all probability was several times larger. Realizing his position, Baucis and Leo marched south to the stronghold of Anartus. The Byzantine army was reinforced by a garrison sent from Aleppo, which linked with the main force en route. After drawing local recruits from the area around Anartus, Baucis felt confident enough to engage Manu Takin's force. The Fatimid general reacted quickly, leaving a small party behind to continue the ongoing siege of Aleppo, while he moved to intercept the Romans. By September, the two armies had neared each other. Michael Baucis and Melicinos had taken position next to a ford on the Orontes River. Manu Takin's multi-ethnic force assembled on the opposite bank. Supposedly, Baucis was able to position his men better. Despite that, the Fatimids eventually gained the initiative. Separated from the main Byzantine army, a contingent of Aleppan recruits faced a Fatimid squadron of Bedouins and Berbers located on the opposite bank. This section of the battlefield was the first to see action, as the Berbers crossed a ford and charged straight at their fellow Muslims. Frightened by the overwhelming enemy numbers, the Aleppans fled, exposing the Byzantine rear. In the meantime, Baucis' main force had engaged Manu Takin's men.
And this is a problem because now his army is... his main force is committed, while this cavalry flanking detachment is going to swing around, and yeah, it's going to be a disaster.
Unfortunately for the Romans, the Berbers abstained from pursuing the fleeing Aleppans, instead choosing to assist their general. Soon the Byzantines were struck on two sides. Having already lost as many as 5,000 men, the Duke of the East ordered a retreat, fleeing towards his base in Antioch. This victory enabled the Fatimids to continue their siege on Aleppo. Manu Takin had no plans of lifting the blockade anytime soon. The Turkic general prepared to winter in enemy territory. He was supposedly so dedicated to conquering the city that he ordered the construction of baths and bazaars within his camp. Realizing the severity of the situation, the emperor, who had just arrived in Constantinople, began planning a course of action. A potential fall of Aleppo would open the gates for a Fatimid conquest of Antioch, erasing 3 centuries of Byzantine progress in the area. Yet Basil was no longer an inexperienced prince. The past 10 years had transformed him into an imposing figure, and in the coming spring, the emperor would have an opportunity to showcase his abilities again.
Yeah, so Basil is being faced with an urgent need to defend Aleppo, so he's going to have to leave the Bulgarian theater to some other general and make his way towards Antioch. And he's gonna muster quite a substantial force to assist Michael Baucis here and relieve Aleppo. But yeah, let's have a look at the footnote. I didn't do that last time. Anyways, the Lassinus defeat forced Basil II to personally lead yet another campaign in Syria. The following year, he will arrive in mid-September. Yep, just talked about that. The rebellious Phocas was a member of the prominent Cappadocian family, yeah, and a nephew of Emperor Nicephorus. Yep, we mentioned that too. Fatimid Caliph al-Hakim's farthest reaching diplomatic mission was to Song China. Captain Domiat reached Shandong in 1008 AD. He presented the Caliph's gifts to the Chinese Emperor Zhenzong. This re-established diplomatic relations between Egypt and China that had been lost during the collapse of the Tang dynasty in 907. Very interesting, yeah. And Romans had connections with the Chinese too, but that's a topic for another video. But anyways, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.